today. Thank you all for being here. I'm so happy to see all of your faces here today. My name is Stephanie Natty Olson. I am a Palestinian American, and as many of you can imagine, the past 11 months have been devastating and heartbreaking as we have witnessed one massacre after another of the Palestinian people, as well as the loss of our collective humanity as we see the continued suffering at the hands of our government and the Israeli government. But as I shared with a wonderful stranger I met 2 days ago at the Atlanta airport, the way that I see people growing the circle of solidarity with Palestinians and continuing to join us and support us and learn more and try to understand more gives me a lot of hope in this moment. So I love seeing you all here, and it's a gift to the movement for a free Palestine. I know many of you are here today to see Miko Peled, me too. I've been eagerly awaiting this day since we got it scheduled, in fact, and we'll hear from him shortly. But before we dive in, I want to thank Dr. Khoury Foundation, who brought all of us here today. Dr. Khoury, yes. Dr. Khoury is the founder and president of the Laurice Khoury Foundation, which supports students with disabilities in Palestine to receive their secondary and collegiate educations. So he's going to take the stage in a moment just to share more about the foundation and some really exciting news about the foundation, and that I'll save for him. I don't want to steal your thunder, but it's really exciting. And I think the work that the Laurice Khoury Foundation is doing is so important because continuing to educate and create avenues for Palestinians to receive education is yet another resistance to the destruction of our culture and identity and our lives. So I'm very thankful to be a board member and to be working with Dr. Khoury on that. Miko and I will be up here doing a fireside chat for you for about an hour. We'll take a restroom break about halfway through, and then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A with Miko. So please save your questions for the end. We'll make sure that we get to everybody and you can ask your questions. Following the Q&A, Miko will be signing some of his books in the lobby, so stick around for that as well. We've got a packed day, but I feel good about us getting back on time, ish. And if you haven't signed up, I guess everyone here has bought a ticket, so we have all of your emails. We'll be sending out a recording of the event afterwards. Please share it far and wide as well. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Khoury to talk more about the Laurice Khoury Foundation.
Can you hear me well? First of all, I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. It gives me great honor and pleasure to be here on a Labor Day weekend. My story is a rather long story, but I'll try to make it short. I was born in Nablus, Palestine in 1965. And as a person with a disability, obviously, I opened my eyes and all I could see was the Israeli occupation at the age of 3 and until the age of 18. I had to deal with Israeli occupation and disability at the same time. Two big challenges, to be honest with you. And I made a decision to come to America at the age of 18, and I came here. And I was able to pursue my education at Syracuse University, and then I moved into become a faculty member at Mercer University. I'm a professor of mathematics. I've been at Mercer University for 31 years. And in 2018, I decided to take a trip, my first trip back to Palestine after I left in 1983. That's 35 years later. And when I went back in 2018, I didn't see much of a change. The reality is still difficult. The occupation is still there in one way, in one form or another. And I was shocked. 35 years I left and nothing has changed. And I went there for one simple reason, and that is to share my story with disabled students at An-Najah National University, which is the largest public university in Palestine in the city of Nablus, my hometown. When I came back, I came with the idea of establishing a foundation. And of course, I decided to name the foundation in honor of my mom, Laurice Khoury, who lived with me her last 20 years of her life. She passed away in 2022. And the idea actually for the foundation came before her passing, but I decided to name the foundation in her name, honoring her. because she was really the supporter of my life. And yeah, I wanted to honor her. And that's the best way I could do that. So I'm hoping that this will be uh, time to celebrate her support for people and children with disabilities. I have a sister also, she was born with a disability. And so I decided to name it after her. And I approached Reverend Fad. I said, Fad, I have this idea. Will you help me with it? He said, of course. Fad is a board member, and I would like to also recognize all the board members of the foundation who are present here. I know Stephanie is one, Fad is another one. Where's Christian? Christian, who else is here from the board members? Elise is here. Elise Stone is here. Anyone else? Patrick Giffey, who checked you in at the front desk, he's also a board member, he's our treasurer. And let me tell you, the foundation works like a vehicle. There's a driver, there's an engine, and there are wheels. You can't go anywhere without them. So the engine is Patrick, who's the treasurer for the foundation, and the wheels are the board members. And I'm here only to lead the effort and make it happen. And I'm very thankful to your support, your support, because your support makes things happen. I'm here to tell you today and share with you the good news. We were able to send 16 scholarships to the 16 deserving disabled students in Palestine enrolled at Palestinian universities. 5 I may be the one who led the effort, but it's you who made the difference. You have to know that. It's you who ultimately makes the difference. Whatever donations you make to the foundation, they're going to go to the support of education of these individuals who are enrolled at Palestinian universities. Let's not forget Gaza, okay? Right now, there are no universities in Gaza that are operating. They're in ruins, to be honest with you. There's nothing left. So we have to wait until Gaza is rebuilt. But the students in Gaza are now enrolled in universities on the West Bank. And Najaf National University and Birzeit University are now enrolling about 5,000 students from the Gaza Strip remotely, using very creative methods, using modules, using the internet whenever it's available. So we're still supporting students from Gaza, even though we have no memorandum of understanding with any university in Gaza. God willing, when the war is over, hopefully it will be over yesterday before today, we will be establishing partnerships with universities in Gaza, because the people in Gaza have suffered tremendously. I wouldn't be surprised if we will end up with at least 20,000 amputees in the Gaza Strip after the war is over, at least. And these individuals deserve a future, they deserve a life, they deserve the dream and their dreams to become true. So I want to encourage you to support the foundation. I'm asking you to support the foundation to help these people, because enough is enough. Enough is enough. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. So Miko doesn't need much of an introduction. If you follow what's been happening in Palestine for the last 76 years, you've heard of Miko, you've seen him speak. It's an honor to have him here today. His resume as a humanitarian who devotes his time and energy to raising awareness of the injustices perpetrated against the Palestinian people deserves to be commended. Miko is an author, speaker, human rights activist based in DC. He strongly supports the BDS movement and the creation of a single democracy with equal rights for all in historic Palestine. He came into his work by way of personal tragedy, the devastating death of his beloved niece at the hands of a Palestinian suicide bomber. This personal tragedy would spark a desire for an understanding of the apartheid conditions imposed on the Palestinian population and the role played by the Israeli government in the continued suffering of Palestinians. Miko was born and educated in Jerusalem and has been a loyal supporter of the pro-Palestine movement for many years. He's one of the premier scholars on the injustices being committed against the Palestinian people by Israel, and he's written 2 critically acclaimed books. I'm going to urge you many times today to read them because they're incredible. The first is called The General's Son, A Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and his latest book is called Injustice, The Story of the Holy Foundation 5. Miko will be signing both of these books after our talk today. Miko, I can't thank you enough for being here today. Friends, please join me in welcoming Miko to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to share
Thank you
this
so
mic.
much. Okay, very good.
I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you, and I think one that's probably on a lot of people's minds is like, how do you go from being the son of this infamous Israeli general to someone who's talking about a free Palestine daily and spending your whole life dedicated to that work these days?
Well, first, let me thank everybody for being here and thank Dr. Khoury for inviting me. We met a few weeks ago at another conference, at the Ramallah Convention, and started chatting, and then he told me about the event and asked me to come. And so I'm honored to be here. This foundation, I can't think of a more honorable or more important cause than to support handicapped Palestinian young people. The lack of infrastructure. By the way, how many people here have been to Palestine? Can I see a show of hands? Oh, wow, okay. How many people are Palestinian? Okay, great. I mean, the lack of infrastructure for handicapped people there is appalling. It's absolutely appalling. I went with a group of friends, one of whom just needed a cane and had a little bit of difficulty walking, and it was unbelievable. They're just unbelievable. And you only notice it, of course, when you're with somebody like somebody who has that, has some sort of disability. And so it's a great. This is a great initiative. It's a great foundation. And your story, Hani, is inspiring. So thank you for inviting me and allowing me to be part of this. So how do you go from being raised in a super ultra Zionist patriarch family and end up doing what I do? So there's a book. Unfortunately, the books didn't arrive, so we don't have a copy of the books here. But that's why there's a book. And at one point, I was already speaking, and I was flip it up a little bit. Oh, this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of points.
Okay. Oh, I see. Gotcha. Sure. Okay. Sure. No problem. Being raised in the family that I was raised in. So the most famous member of the family was my father, because he was a general, and in a militaristic society like the Israeli society, in a militaristic state like the state of Israel, generals are like gods. The military is above everything. Now, what made the distinction that my father had was that he was from a generation that was even more than gods. I don't know how else to describe it, because they were young officers in 1948, and then they were generals in 1967, which in the Zionist narrative were 2 incredibly important developments in the establishment of the Zionist state. So 1948 is considered to be like a war of independence, and 1967 was a war of survival. And the same group of people, first as young officers in 1948, then as very young generals, they were in their 40s, which is very, very young, once again, saved us. So, having one of those people, and it's a very small group of people, one of those people as your father, as you're growing up, your father's a god, and everybody adores him. I mean, you feel very special. Now, he was not the only member of my family that was part of this legendary group of Zionist leaders. My grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. I had a great uncle who was the president of the state. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on. So family gatherings were like a history book. And I didn't have to learn about Zionism, you know, from a high school book or a college textbook. It was every day. There was no other conversation around the dinner table ever. Nothing else was ever discussed other than the state, what benefits the state, how we give to the state, how we sacrifice, and of course the Zionist state. So that's the background. And what I found in my life, in my experience, is that almost always, if not always, when big shifts happen in our consciousness, in our ability to, the way we view the world, is more often than not as a result of something terrible, something that shakes us to the core and forces us to re-examine everything we know and everything we believe in. And that's exactly what happened to my family. That's what exactly happened. In 1997, it was September 4th, the date is coming up. That date, September 4th, is a date that, you know, we all dread in my family, because that was the day it happened. My sister's little girl was killed in a suicide mission in Jerusalem. And that's precisely the kind of shock that forces you to re-examine everything. And typically what happens, because there's so much violence and we've kind of become completely accustomed, like the violence become normalized. The reality in Palestine, the violent reality in Palestine has become normalized, which is one of the big problems, I think, to begin with. So we talk about all these horrific acts of violence and we just move from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And of course, the vast majority, the lion's share of the violence is perpetrated against Palestinians. And when speaking to Palestinians, again, it's like a list of horrors that people just go through when they're talking even about their own experience. So I kind of hit pause and said, well, let's see what actually happened there on September the 4th, 1997. 3 young men took their own lives and the lives of bystanders in downtown, Jerusalem, on the West Jerusalem, the Israeli side of Jerusalem, if you will. Just think about that for a minute. What kind of reality had to be in place for something so terrible to happen? And I think part of the problem is that we never stop to think about that. How do we get to a point where something so horrible can actually happen? And the late 90s were very, very difficult years. There was a lot of violence going on. And again, we just go through the list of the horrors. But it was that moment that really, it didn't happen at that moment. It took a while. And one of the good fortunes that I had, I was living in San Diego already at the time. So I went back to Jerusalem, I spent time with my family, and then went back. And then what do? Who do you talk to? Nobody wants to talk about the Palestinian issue anyway. But to talk about particularly something so horrible, there's really nobody. And gradually, I was very fortunate that I was able to find the Palestinian community in San Diego, chief of whom was a cousin of Dr. Khoury, who to this day remains my mentor and a good close friend, George Majid Khoury. And my first encounter with Palestinians was at his home in San Diego. And mind you, I was born and raised in Jerusalem. Well, there are many Palestinians in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is supposedly a mixed city, but it's completely segregated. Completely segregated. So you never meet Palestinians. And from that moment on, my engagement went and developed and became deeper and deeper and deeper. And that was more than 20 years ago.
Was it scary for you? I mean, I feel like the Israeli indoctrination is every Palestinian wants to kill you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like-
Of course. It was, and I talk about this, actually, I describe it in the book, in The General Sun, this feeling that I am, for the first time in my life, now the meeting I was going to, this is the early 2000s, there was this phenomenon of living room dialogue groups. And that's what this was. My good fortune was that George Khoury and the Palestinians who were in that group were activist people. So I got a really fast and good indoctrination and education about Palestine. But it was, there was definitely some fear involved because, what if it's a trap? And what I didn't realize, and I think we often don't realize, are the fears that are embedded in us, and they only show up like when something triggers them for some reason, and that certainly was a trigger. So suddenly all these demons started moving from the back of my head into the forefront. But it was one of the most important things I'd ever done.
Yeah. And you did it anyway.
Yeah, I did it anyway, of course, yeah.
I think it's so interesting to think through that, because the fear that is instilled in Israelis and Israel, and I think Jews worldwide, about Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs, it's hard to penetrate, and I think you're such an interesting case, and somebody who was able to bridge that gap and kind of shed some of that fear and indoctrination in order to have an open heart to receive other people. So what did you learn about Palestinians after that?
Well, what I learned before I tell you what I learned about Palestinians, what I learned initially throughout that process, because that was the first step in many, many, many instances and experiences that I had, and most of which took place in Palestine itself, where the demons came up and said, "You're out of your mind, don't go there." And I went anyway.
Yeah.
And what I found was if we allow for trust to come in, then the power of the fear is diminished. And the more we do it, the more we allow trust to come in, the more the fear is diminished. And that was the process. And that was that first step. But first of all, the initial moment, the initial experience I had in stepping into that home was the warmth and generosity that is Palestine. There's nothing more powerful than that. And anybody who's been to Palestine and met Palestinians, knows what I'm talking about. There's this warmth and generosity that supersedes, comes before anything and everything, and is more powerful than everything and anything. And that's part of, the character of Palestinians. And that was from that moment and all the way, all these decades, all these years later, that's still my, the straw. If you ask me about Palestinians, those are two things that come to mind.
Yeah. When you began to unpack what would drive these young children, adolescents, to go on a suicide mission, what were the things that you began to unravel about what was actually happening in Palestine and the role that Israel was playing in all of that had been hidden from you your whole life?
So I had a little bit of a head start. So there's another part of the story that has to do with my father, and the reason my father was unique and well known, and that is that in 1967, immediately after the war. Now he was a member of the Israeli High Command, so he was one of the people who planned and executed the 1967. And I think calling it a war actually is a bit of a
Misnomer.
I think it's misleading. I think it was a massive, brutal assault by the Zionist state against its neighbors. In 5 days, 3 Arab countries were decimated. The numbers of casualties on the Arab side were, horrifying, and so on. And so that's really what that was. But then, on the last day of the war, the 5th day of the war, they called it the 6-day war, but it's actually 5 days. the reason they call it 6 days is to point to the miracle, the 6 days of creation.
Mm.
And in the Jewish texts, in the Jewish scriptures, 6 days, 6 days of creation, 6 days, the miracle of 6 days, it shows up a lot in the prayer book. Shows up a lot. And that's why they call it the 6 Day War. And I had this conversation with Phil Weiss, who was the guy that founded Mondo Weiss.
Yeah.
And he and I are both, very secular people, and we're both Jewish. And we're both talking about this notion that people who are completely secular and otherwise don't believe in miracles on this issue agree that that was a miracle. But anyway, so that's just a little side note about the 6 days. But he stood up on the first meeting of the Israeli High Command while still in uniform and said, now we have an opportunity to resolve the Palestinian question. We can allow them to establish a state of their own in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, make peace with the state, return all these other territories that we just occupied, and move on. And for somebody with his background to say something like that was unbelievable. And of course,
it was viewed as generous to the Palestinians.
It was insane.
Yeah.
The war, the attack and the occupation that came as a result were not something that they just had an idea, oh, let's do this tomorrow morning. This is something that was well planned. This is part of the Zionist ideology. They were, a lot of these generals were upset that in 1948, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were not taken. They had to wait 20 years. They finally were given the opportunity to do what they call finish the job, which is the conquest of Palestine, or what they call the land of Israel. And suddenly this guy who was a major player in pushing for the war suddenly says we have to give it all back. What is he out of his mind? So he was told basically just, this is nonsense. Why is he talking like this? He remained in the military another year, and then the rest of his life, he died 1995, he pursued that idea of what we know today is a two-state solution. And he became Mr. Peace with Palestine. That was kind of the second part of his life. That was his legacy. Granted, he was a Zionist and all that, but that was something that he believed in very strongly. He met with Yasser Arafat, and there's a whole part of his life that has to do with that. So I came into this with a head start because I already knew that there were some, in this whole Zionist story, there were some imperfections. So what happened on September the 4th, 1997, opened up those imperfections even more. And I have to give credit where credit is due. My sister, whose daughter was killed, she stood up and she was asked, people came, it was a big news, a lot of newspaper interviews and stuff like that. I mean, their apartment was packed with journalists from around the world. And she stood up and she said, number one, no real mother would want to see this happen to any other mother. Don't talk to me about retaliation. Number two, she said, what do we expect? When you do this to another people, when you oppress them and kill their children and arrest their fathers and take their land and on and on and on, what do we expect? How can we not, this is what's going to happen. And that, of course, shook me and shook everybody else that heard it. A mother who just lost her daughter talking like that. And then I came back to the US with this very strong sense that I need to get into this. Doesn't matter what I do, I have to get into this. And so I would go back and forth. I'd come here and then I'd go back to Palestine, and I would travel more and learn more and go to Palestinian cities, different parts of Palestine. And, the more I got into it, the more I got into it.
Yeah. I think I've been learning as much as I can about kind of the storytelling that is such a big part of the Zionist narrative, right? Like the storytelling of you can't go into Palestine, right? They want you dead, like don't step foot in there, right? And so I think kind of unpacking that and being able to navigate the country and step foot in the country and get to know people is so important. When you think about the bridge from 1948 to 2024 with 11 months of continued massacre, do you see it as one long kind of genocide against Palestinian people in service of getting greater Israel, all the land that Israel wants? Or how do you think about that continuation of violence and everything that's been perpetrated against Palestinians?
I think that, excuse me, I think anybody who pays attention can see that this is one long continuation. There's this narrative out there that says, there's been an extreme, that the Israeli society has become more extreme, that it's gone farther to the right. How much more extreme can they get from 1948? I mean, 1948 was a massive campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and an apartheid regime was put in place. There's more extreme than that, And then all of those years, the massacres didn't stop. The apartheid only became, more entrenched. There hasn't been any, it is one continuum, and what is happening now over the last 10, 11 months in Gaza is an absolutely natural progression of what we've seen over the last 76 years. In other words, let me put it this way. Anybody who's surprised hasn't been paying attention. And for years now, and I noticed this only recently, people replay videos of mine from the past, and I've been saying, we haven't even begun to see the worst of it. We haven't even begun. We're going to look back at the years, this is pre-October 7, as the good old days. And that's if we don't stop it, if we don't do everything we can to dismantle the apartheid state and disable it so that the lives of Palestinians, the safety of Palestinians are guaranteed, then it's going to get far, far worse. And of course it did. So it is absolutely one continuous process of genocide without any question. And it is without any doubt an apartheid regime that is just becoming more and more entrenched. And what is absurd is, first of all, that there's international legitimacy given to this apartheid state from the outset, from the very beginning. Now, 3 years before the apartheid state was established in Palestine, the world put on trial the perpetrators of the Jewish Holocaust, of the Nazi Holocaust. They, terms like law, the legal definitions like crimes against humanity, genocide, were established in those years, within those years, between 45 and 49, 48. And then they let this happen. They let this genocide unfold. They let this apartheid regime take hold of Palestine right in front of everybody's eyes. And to make it even worse, how cynical of them, they pretended that is okay to do because of what happened to Jewish people during World War II. In other words, how embarrassing, I can't imagine the cynicism to justify the horrors that were taking place in Palestine since 1948, to justify that. It's almost a desecration of the memory of the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
To say that this justifies that. But they've been very good at it. And today, people are arguing about whether or not it's a genocide. Well, genocide is a very well-defined crime. It was defined. It's written in law. You can read it. And if you take the definition of the crime of genocide and what has been happening in Palestine since 1947, you can check every single box.
It's, I was stopped by